Hi everyone. So I made a video which was a Marxist analysis of High School Musical 2, and today I have a part 2 because I just rewatched the movie and there's so much I didn't talk about. So therefore I will hopefully become a lot more specific and bring a lot of new points up that get out of the movie when watching it. And this will be more focused on, like I have written here, how High School Musical 2 predicts a successful communist revolution. So it will be less about the Marxist terms and more about how specific characters symbolize specific things within the context of a class struggle that could be something that is happening in our world today. So let me show you my 5 points of analysis. If I can make this go, could you please? Okay, so there are 5 points of analysis. First of all, we have the overall premise. I'll talk about capitalism and the concept of meritocracy. Then I'll talk about water as a metaphor for private ownership. I'll talk about Troy and Gabriella, and I'll talk about Ryan. And I think I've actually flipped these two around. And then I'll talk about the film's end. So, yes, and I have a picture of Engels here because I was kind of sad that I left him out last time. Yeah, because, history has enough white men. So I will move on to the first point, which is capitalism and the concept of meritocracy. So real quick to summarize, obviously I recommend that you've watched the previous video, but the idea is pretty simple. Troy and his friends are workers in this vacation resort and they get exploited by their classmate Sharpie and other people. So now what I'm gonna just say is that the resort itself is like a metaphor for industrialization because Troy and his friends were already workers. They were already students. They had to go on their separate student jobs in order to get money for college. However, what happens here is that all the workers become gathered at this one place where the rich people also are. And this is essentially what leads to the class consciousness that I talked about last time. Because the workers discover that the rich people have a much better time and they want to be part of that as well. They want to enjoy the pool as well, like these people do. So that's a parallel to the real historical thing, which was industrialization, which was that the critique of capitalism only started when workers started to live close together with rich people in cities. So this is kind of the idea that capitalism is starting its own downfall because it's showing the workers how they could potentially live. Now, what happens is that Troy has a talk with his dad, and his dad is like, "Oh, you deserve this. You deserve to be high up because Troy is getting hired by Sharpie into this whole crowd of fancy people." And his dad is saying like, "Oh, you need this. You need this in order to get your scholarship, in order to become the best version of yourself you can be." So this is essentially his father, who's clearly a working class man. He's established as such in the film. He's kind of buying into the logic of capitalism. He's saying like, "Oh, you can be good, you can do your best." But it's a lie because we know that Troy's only being hired because Sharpay wants him, not because he's actually good. This is the logic of meritocracy. In our modern world, we think that the most rich people are the ones who are inherently the best or the most skilled, but that's not necessarily true at all. And we see that in this film because Troy ends up internalizing this logic when he has a discussion with his best friend Chat, who's a real Chat. And they had this discussion, and Troy's like, "I earned this, I deserved this," but we know he didn't. We know that it's all bullshit. That the rich people just decide whoever gets the good stuff. Now, I also want to talk about the fact that the workers in this movie have a really positive portrayal. They're portrayed as great people, and the rich people are portrayed like rich assholes. This is one way the movie tells its story, but there are other movies like Parasite, the Oscar winner last year, who tells the story differently because that movie has a very negative portrayal of its workers because it's showing that only the rich people can afford to be nice. The workers can't afford that. They just have to survive. But this is kind of a different, maybe pro worker film, I guess. It's a different take on that whole struggle. Now, my second point, this one is actually pretty obvious. It's water as a metaphor for private ownership of resources. So, the film very specifically states three circumstances in which Troy and Gabriella does something that their boss does not like. There are like 3 points in the film where their boss is like, "You've done this and it's bad," and all 3 points involve water. And the first point, okay, actually one of the points is just them getting late for work, but one of the points is here where they're playing in the golf field, playing with this water that's used to spray the field, and they're being told not to do that. And the second time, or the third time, I should say, they're bathing in the pool, but the pool is closed and they're not allowed to bathe in it. Now, this is interesting because these cases show that there's a theme about water. Water is something being used for the golf fields, which again the rich people use, and the swimming pool water is used also only for the rich people. This shows how specifically the fact that they're being punished because of private ownership, which is what capitalism does. It allows a few people to own specific resources, like, for example, water, and use them to their own benefit, but not allow actual workers to get a hold of that. So they're not allowed to swim in the pool, even though they've been working all day. And these specific cases show this. They show how the private ownership of resources isn't fair because it messes up the love of our protagonists. And that's also why it's so important in the end that the pool is something suddenly now everyone can use. It's a very clever metaphor for like natural resources. And as you know, it's a real thing in this world that people own resources of water and other people desperately need those resources. So that's a problem, and that's good that the film addresses this. Third point. This is interesting. This is how Ryan, who is Sharpay's brother, um, is like he represents something like I would call the intellectual left wing. Both like Rune Lykkeberg and Thomas Piketty, who are like big left wing international like intellectuals. They've written about this. Piketty has just written about it in his book Capital and Ideology. If you haven't read it, I haven't either. But shout out to Helena who has. And Rune Lykkeberg has written about it in Vest mod Vesten, and it's basically about how the left wing are now mostly like intellectual people. Like you, if you're a high school student, you're more or less an intellectual. You're not like a traditional working class person. Now, Ryan represents the intellectuals because I mentioned last time how he ends up cooperating with the workers. He ends up actually helping Troy and his friends. But why does he do this? It's not because he doesn't have any power. He clearly has power. He's rich and privileged and he dresses like it. But it's because he opposes things like racism and power abuse, which is shown because Troy is being shown this song that Sharpay and Ryan are performing to him. And I'm not going to say the name of the song. The song is clearly racist and like appropriating culture, and it's just a song meant to make them look good, and they're just kind of trashing on whatever culture they're appropriating here for the sake of pleasing Troy. Now that's interesting because this like opposition that Ryan gets to his sister's power abuse and racism is kind of the thing that the intellectual left wing has done. It's suddenly realized that the right wing is not nice because they only care about whatever economics and not people, and they've realized that there are racists in society. And so that's why a lot of the left wing has become like an intellectual left wing who oppose these things, but who actually has a lot of privileges themselves. And Ryan is like a positive take on this story because in the end, he ends up helping the actual working class students a lot and he helps them win. So that's a good thing, right? Yes. Part four, Troy and Gabriella as different left-wing strategies. So like Troy basically gets a taste. Oh, I don't have this picture. Troy here basically gets a taste of the power. He becomes part of the rich elite. He becomes part of this whole system. He has to perform a song with Sharpay, um, and in the end, it's corrupted him. He's become a bad guy. And Gabriella takes a stand against this. She says, "No, I will not be a part of this." That's because Gabriella represents more like humanitarian or like very left wing. I know that these two aren't the same, but like the point is she's uncompromising. She has these strong values of friendship and um, like solidarity. And when she sees that Troy has lost his way, she leaves. She simply leaves the thing. However, Gabriella has already done a great job because she's already radicalized a lot of the working people. Look at these two. This is the sports game. It was Gabriella's idea for this to happen, and in this game, they realize that they want to perform their dance at the end, and the dance is like the metaphor for who wins, who gets the power. So Gabriella has essentially radicalized these people. So she represents like the fact that a very aggressive left wing can do something and can do some good and radicalize workers. However, she also leaves because she doesn't want to compromise her values. But Troy has already tasted this power, and it's only when Gabriella leaves that he has to make a choice and actually leave the power and actually help his fellow workers. And that's what happens. So in the end, Gabriella and Troy kind of represent different takes. Like Troy is a left-wing person who has tasted the power, but he has to make the choice to be good, just like Gabriella and the rest of the workers already are. So this is kind of a parallel to like social democracies all over Europe, for example, who have been cutting down on welfare for many years, but they kind of have to make a choice to stand with their working class and actually support workers. That's the choice that Troy has to make. So that's pretty interesting as well. Finally, like the end is pretty interesting because it really shows how easily capitalism digs its own grave. Because Sharpay essentially she sends out an order that says that no worker can perform at the great important music event. And that excludes Troy as well, because Troy is like, no, I'm a worker, you're excluding me. And suddenly Sharpay is useless. So it shows how capitalists are essentially useless without their workers, how the rich elites, if their workers leave them, and it's Sharpay's choice. She makes Troy go away because she physically says he cannot be part of the power, he cannot be part of the political system. And Troy's like, okay, and then he goes back to his worker identity. He's like, no, I stand with my friends. And in the end, Gabrielle has to let them perform. So in order to save herself, which a lot of capitalists do, or like rich people do, they'll like give the workers rights. However, in the end, this makes her completely like pointless because they make it seem like Troy and Sharpay have to sing, but then Gabriella just replaces Sharpay. So it also shows how there's no compromise necessary to the rich and with the rich and powerful. Like Sharpay can just be replaced. She's useless. And in the end, all the workers just easily take over this whole scenario. And as we see in the end, they manage to have a successful revolution, I guess, where everyone has like collectivized things and all is good. So that's pretty optimistic of the film, but like it's funny because yeah, I don't know, I think we could learn something. I don't know.